Okay, I am on and live, I believe. So Twitch chat, if you can just give me a double check by saying you can hear me, that'd be terrific. And look, that was the best elevator music I've ever heard. I don't know if you in the room were able to hear it, but I certainly could. So look, welcome. It's an honor to be here with you, although remote. So I do apologize I'm not there in person. I would take the opportunity to go to Canada for the first time, but unfortunately not this time. So today, I'm going to give you a talk on drones, or the commercial off-the-shelf drones. And we're going to be looking at why the cyber and physical worlds of security are really starting to merge. And there are some really interesting challenges and threats throughout it. So this is a closing keynote, which means it will be available to all in terms of the understanding. And so hopefully I can take you through that journey and we come out the other side, okay? Now, a few of you may remember a couple months or even a year ago, there was a subreddit called Wall Street Bets. And the Wall Street Bets were trying to make stock market movements against popular companies like GameStop. And they were going up against some of the heavy hitting hedge funds, such as Citadel Securities. And what's really interesting is, when you're driving your car along a road, Google takes that data and they make sure that they can tell what the traffic is like or what your journey distance would be. As a matter of fact, though, if you're in a certain area or a building, your phone data also tells Google how busy that area is, depending on the number of phones in that room. So, for example, when the Wall Street Bets group were trying to analyze everything Citadel Securities was doing, both their online and physical presence, they used Google's phone data to find out that at 2:30 a.m., there was a huge amount of activity in the building, which is odd for a company that usually works 9 to 5. And so doing this type of OSINT, they realized, well, we've seen some physical activity. Does anyone have a pair of binoculars nearby? Well, instead of binoculars, what is even better is having a drone being launched and live streamed to the rest of the group so that they can actually see what's inside of this skyscraper. Now, they're pretty high up and it's in the middle of the CBD, but someone nearby was able to launch that drone and be able to look into the offices and determine where they're packing boxes, where they're making trades late at night. What can we do here using this footage in a way that combines digital and physical ISR into a point where we can get to somewhere that's really hard to reach. Using this information, they could do certain things. They could either continue to trade or back off or do something else. But regardless, I just really want to kind of explain the intersection of these two areas and how drones are incredibly useful to do this kind of thing in a range of different topics, which we'll get through today. One of the reasons why we consider drones to be super important, it's why I do it as a day job all day long, is because they can operate indoors, they can operate outdoors, they can operate in many different weather types. They can operate, up near planes and helicopters, but also down near people, right? And so they're not just like an IoT connected fridge, which is sitting there in your kitchen that if affected by a botnet, couldn't do anything more than maybe drop some ice out the front. They really are kinetic, right? They can fly around, they can drop things, you can attach things to them, you can hack with them, you can perform surveillance, cameras, audio, and what have you. So they're incredible tools, and that's what I'm really going to get into today. Just a bit of a background. So DroneSec focuses on threat intelligence for drones. And you may be wondering why I'm sharing this type of slide. And it's because, with the cybersecurity industry over the years, we have seen it get to the point where our SOC analysts are seeing hundreds or millions or billions of events per day. Drones are still at that point where we're seeing about 150 to 200 kind of major incidents per month, but that is going to ramp up, and I'll explain why. But personally, we started hacking into drones as soon as, or as far ago as 2016, and we realized we have to start tracking the vulnerabilities, the exploits that come out for drones, how they're being utilized, the countermeasures that take down drones with hacking techniques. And we want to try and document these TDPs. So we have a live drone incident map. Some of it is cybersecurity, some of it is physical issues. But when we get to the end of this presentation, you'll realize why we bundle the two together. They really can't just be separate. We actually are a team. So what happens behind the scenes is a team of red team operators, pen testers, Air Force pilots, and military drone pilots, all of us commercial drone pilots as well, who wanted to focus on this area. And so we've done a lot of research, and that's what I'm here to tell you today. For myself, my name is MikeMonnik. I have stood up OSINT and red team operations within organizations doing this against critical infrastructure, high security facilities. We've done everything from open source intelligence to utilizing drones for these. And we see it as a great way to combine physical and cyber security to replicate a threat actor, right? And to be able to give your customer an experience of what adversaries could do to them. I personally have created hundreds of CTF challenges. Ask me about any of them. Some of them are on GitHub if you want to enjoy doing some of those. And in my spare time or personal time, I am very passionate about using open source intelligence for missing persons. Trace Labs, MPAN are great organizations, but we also try to do that in our own free time as well. And I do enjoy the nature and actually flying my drones. We're not all here just about hacking into and breaching drones themselves. Now, I am coming from Australia, and when most people think of Australia, it's one of two images. It's often a cute, cuddly koala, or it's a koala when it gets wet in the rain, or the alleged image that did the rounds a few years ago. For me, none of these are really what I think of when I think of Australia. Personally, we have some incredible things like the Wallamai pine. It can be viewed via a drone. It sits in a national park. It is one of the only trees found in a small canyon in Australia. It's from the Jurassic era. It looks really Jurassic and historic, and it sits in Jurassic Canyon. And I'm telling you this because if you want to do an interesting CTF combining drone footage, open source intelligence, and geospatial intelligence, try to find the Wallamai pine. It's one of the most incredible efforts of our government or of our National Parks Authority to wipe information off the internet and keep its location a secret, a highly protected secret. It's an extremely fun challenge. Anyone from around the world can do it. So if you want to experience it and send me a message that you found it, please go and have a look for the Wallamai pine and find its original location. And send me proof or come over to Australia. I'll take you for a hike and maybe we can go find it together. So I want to start off just by talking about some drone incident trends, because we have the cybersecurity element, but what does that mean with the overall picture? And we've seen in the news over even the past few days things like tracking IDs that have been leaked from DJI AeroScope systems. We've seen drones that have been unencrypted. We've been seeing things like red team drones or malicious adversary drones that have Wi-Fi snooping equipment that sit on the roofs of locations and track that information. What I can tell you right now is none of this is new and none of this is the highest impact points. Whatever is reaching the media at the moment is only the very tip of the iceberg. And we're going to go through some of those and we're going to reveal some of them and we're going to keep some of them still protected, but explain what happened. So why do we care about drones? Well, number one, as I said, they're getting larger, they're going further, they're becoming faster, they're much cheaper to purchase, and they can hold different payloads of explosives or digital systems as well. And threat actors are using drones more and more. In fact, if you have a drone linked up to a system which you can route through, you can do a whole lot of different things, and it increases anonymity, it reduces the attribution or the forensics, and it just means that your malicious operations are so much more advanced. This is basically your what you can call it anonymous hacking, but doing it in the physical world with a physical barrier between yourself. And the problem that we face is to a lot of organizations, they just see it as this kind of magical flying box, right? They don't see it as IT equipment. They don't necessarily know that it goes through procurement measures. They don't know what kind of drone security frameworks and policies are out there. And what's often happens is an employee will be a hobbyist and they'll show the value of a drone to a company. And that company will be like, this is awesome. Let's buy some drones. However, because they're purchasing drones and it doesn't fit into their idea of IT assets, it just skips that process. So right now, I can almost guarantee you that very little organizations have their SOC or have their IT management, even including drones in their ecosystem or their asset management or their security. And that's why it's super important. In terms of what we're seeing within drones and what they're actually doing today, The most common we see are drones flying across borders with narcotics or contraband. They're conducting surveillance against places before doing a robbery. They're intruding on, baseball games and netball games and that kind of thing that we've seen, and causing flight delays. The most dangerous side of things is where you have drones that are weaponized, and this can be with explosive payloads. It can mean, before, critical infrastructure used to have physical security measures and controls. For example, for hostile vehicle mitigation. These days, drones just fly past anything that used to be there for hostile vehicle mitigation, whether it was bollards, whether it's fences, CCTV, it doesn't matter. They get past that. And they can also aid in helping people get past that. So when we use drones in red team operations, we'll often scout for low-lying fences. We'll scout for areas where we can drag a rope or something with the drone over a fence. We'll be able to drop something in front of a CCTV camera. Like, there is an incredible amount of use for a drone to be able to infiltrate and then exfiltrate out of a facility. Terrorists and lone wolves like to use drones because it blends in with civilian activities. It's very hard to pick up whether it's genuine or malicious. Just like packet inspection, it's really hard to tell whether it's a legitimate use. And then lastly, we've got to think about the drone fleets that we own, or the counter drone systems, which I'll get into, which are sitting on the internet. They're internet connected, they're connected to the cloud, and there are various opportunities to break into and manipulate those systems. So we'll cover that today. And look, on a monthly basis, between 150 to 200 incidents occur. Some of these can be hijacking of drones, some of them can be physical incidents, others can be mitigation events. But we track these and log as many as we can to try and determine what's new or what's quite old and existing. When a drone incident occurs, this is something like what you might see. Various payload droppers with narcotics and string and the drone itself. In other cases, you might have remote trigger IEDs that link to 4G SIM cards so that the drone can explode on trigger or on command, or sit there and wait with a timer-based IED. That's often used by cartels or militants. In other cases, you've got drones with propellers that try to reduce that noise, or modifications which help it go further and defeat no-fly zones. So something quite interesting that I just want to add to the impact here is, what other technology other than hacking has been used against militaries? And often military uses military equipment. But in the case of Ukraine, for example, in the very first days, we saw, for example, the Russian army, the Ukrainian army, using commercial off-the-shelf drones. And the complete risk here is that these are systems that have not been tested for vulnerabilities or security implications, yet they're using them above their group to assess the field and make sure it's safe. They're using them to guide artillery fires. They're using them in close quarters combat. And so when you think about the risk there, it's immense. But the reason they're doing this is because the innovation has led to these systems being so incredible that even the military wants to use them, right? They beat other military systems. And that's just to show you the impact they're having. And so where there are drone vulnerabilities or exploits, they may apply to defeat a military-based company that is using these in the field. So the impact is certainly there. Something really interesting was, in the first part of the war, the Ukrainians were using a lot of these drones to drop weaponized payloads or to identify enemy assets. And one of the key concerns was that, their drones were being picked up by these detection systems, and the operator himself was being picked up, and then guided artillery fire was being sent to his position. And what ended up happening was they were losing these pilots. And so one of the things we took up as a company in terms of research was, we've been seeing all these really interesting tactics, techniques, and procedures used by adversaries for quite some time, right? We've seen criminals use it. We've seen, militants and cartels use different techniques. We've seen journalists use ways to, protect their drones from being spotted. So we actually took all these TDPs, we validated them in the field, and we put it into one guide, one document. It was called the OPSEC guide for drone use. And on the left-hand side, we have the various things we covered. Some of them are not relevant for cybersecurity, day and night camouflage, or, recording hygiene, takeoff and landing, how you would land a drone to avoid being detected. But in some cases, the firmware modifications that hobbyists and hackers and modders have used are incredibly important for security and hygiene of these Ukrainian troops. Same with when you unbox a drone. How do you remove that drone ID? How do you remove the potential for it being picked up? How do you avoid certain countermeasures, whether it's GPS or RF or Wi-Fi based? How do you spoof your location so that if artillery fire is focused on the drone operator's location, it hits a random place over the border instead? So an incredibly useful guide, and something that, if you're looking at protecting your organization or using them in red teams, you need to be analyzing what the threat actors are using today so that you can replicate that. And so the face of cyber and physical security is absolutely changing in a way that, maybe we didn't expect a few years ago, or should I say, maybe we didn't expect, but we certainly have seen the impact. So Telegram and other kind of social media channels have been used for a long time to organize different types of meetups and groups and protests and activism. We saw an increase of this in the COVID-19 protests, for example, where they were using things like ATAC to try and guide drones. They wanted to fly them remotely via a laptop to try and spot police positions, get around some of those police positions, use drones as an impact device, fly them to police drones, a various number of things they could use with drones. And a lot of those TDPs end up filtering through to protests that we've seen in Canada, South Africa, Germany, and so forth. Some of this information included, bypassing the drone ID or conducting or doing better firmware to try and remove yourself from being detected. But what's really interesting is in some of these chat groups, they communicate as to how to protect their own drones from being detected. They talk about mesh networking, covering their tracks, how to land and take off by restoring control or doing automated waypoints. And this is because there are countermeasures there that can detect it using radio frequency analysis and using protocol manipulation to take these drones down. We've got a section on that. We'll get to it. And then, of course, the last bit always makes me laugh a bit because, they're making introductions to each other, just like we are at a conference, making introductions, finding out people. They do the same to try and introduce them to someone else who did a drone attack in another part of the world. So these organized criminals are getting more and more organized. They're getting more and more centralized. They're putting their TDPs and tradecraft together and making sure that they can do actions with drones that might subvert our own types of operations. If you think of any kind of breach forums or hacking forums today, a lot of them will focus on hacked accounts, CCs that have been stolen or lifted, breach passwords or database dumps. These days, we're seeing more and more of this kind of thing. People that are selling the schematics or blueprints or the documentation of drones. This one was going for around 18,000 USD, and it was a military-based drone. And obviously, the issue here is that adversaries might take these blueprints, they look through them, they try to reverse engineer some of those schematics so that if they intercept one of these in the field or they come across it, they might be able to use those exploits to take it down. A similar kind of thing with just the sale, right? We went from selling credit cards to selling loitering munitions. If that's not a 2022 kind of thing, I don't know what is, right? Because, with all the munitions going into Ukraine, a large amount of these have found them for sale on, popular forums on the dark web, or even sometimes on the ClearNet. And some of these sellers have been selling, hacked Netflix accounts for the past few months, and then suddenly, I've got a Switchblade 300 for sale. An incredibly interesting change from cyber and physical security. A similar kind of thing is happening with drones. So not just the actual physical drones are being stolen and then used to conduct, say, contraband drops or other nefarious reasons, because obviously there's a serial number on that drone and it doesn't belong to them. So it provides an even greater degree of anonymity. But they're also stealing and hacking DJI accounts. And it's quite useful because if you can attach someone else's account to yours when you're conducting some kind of malicious operation, it really does help with anti-forensics and deattribution of that. And this just means that you're not going to catch them actually purchasing the drones from a store. There's not going to be point of sale information or CCTV. And so a lot of these stolen drones, yes, they're used for contraband drops, but some of them end up in places like Syria. And you're trying to look at how drones can end up being used for terrorist supply chains. And a lot of that is being stolen and then sold off on various marketplaces. We actually built a tool for this. I'm just introducing it here as it might be useful for you. If you do fly drones and it's stolen or lost, you can upload the drone itself with the serial, but it's also quite useful for OSINT purposes. So you can decode serials on here and find out the manufacturing date and model and make and all that kind of thing, especially if you come across it. But if you do come across any drone data online, you can quickly check what kind of drone it might be or who owns it and so forth. On the back end, it was quite an interesting project because, we set up this open source intelligence scraping tool, which took that serial and it looks through all the databases of different marketplaces. And so if it finds a match, which it's found a few already, it will then alert the person who uploaded that and say, we found this serial online, it's at this place. We first thought it was just for stolen drones, and then we had companies coming to us and being like, can you just upload all of our serials so that if our serials appear anywhere on the web, that you're able to find it and look out for it, almost like, breach analysis. At the same time, we insert these serials into various hardware detection systems around the world. And so if they spot using RF analysis or Wi-Fi analysis, they spot that serial in the air, they're going to alert us as well, or potentially take it down. Just something interesting when you get to drone data and what those kind of IDs are and how you can spot them online. We also try to find a large amount of what is new, right? What is something that they've just found out, a new exploit, a new vulnerability, or even in some cases, what is the hardware that they're putting together? And most of you may have seen the videos coming out of Ukraine of payload droppers. And if you don't really know how some of those payload droppers work, the drone has on your controller, you've got a little button. You can press the button and the auxiliary light comes on for the drone, which means that the base light turns on. These droppers are created to receive that light, and when they receive light, the dropper drops, which means it's very easy to just use a button on your own controller to be able to drop something from it. What we're starting to see is various modding and hacking communities creating these types of things, whether it's payload droppers, whether it's these firmware to be able to do this, whether it's even bypasses for some of this the no-fly zones, and being able to share this or even sell it, right? And if any of you remember, maybe it's still happening, but back in the old days, there was $30 for this hacking tutorial or for the script or something. That's essentially continuing in the drone space. They're selling them online, but then people are able to go and print that off or be able to use it on their drone. And it includes things like extended batteries, ways to make your drone go further, bypass certain controls, and so forth. And so, we want to take a quick deep dive into drone cybersecurity. If none of you have heard of it before, I'm sure some of you have. There's the Blue C-UAS program that stood up in the US to make sure that drones are protected to some degree against hijacking, spoofing, data exfiltration, and so forth. And so when we try to explain that from a base standpoint, number one, if you can carry C4 with explosive ball bearings on a drone, you can carry a wireless monitoring device as well. Depending on the power and the weight ratio and what it requires, often FPV drones are not the best bet here. You'd be using a larger drone that can have extra battery packs or whatnot. But there's a range of devices that are able to be modified to suit the needs of including a cybersecurity element. And I'm going to go back to the basics here, but if you weren't so aware, a single drone is very much like a single computer and the way it acts. A commercial drone fleet is almost like an enterprise network. They have a central node which can often control a one-to-many situation of multiple drones at the same time. Not always, but sometimes that node can be able to take off, land, send waypoints, and so forth. And then you have counter-drone systems, and often these are seen as kind of the anti-malware or the antivirus of the drone world. They are there to detect bad drones and be able to take them down. And they use a variety of identification purposes for that. The typical drone stack is very similar to computers, right? You still have IP addresses where the various system components are talking to each other using traditional computer protocols and networks, IP addresses to send that information through, and again, connected to the internet to send that information. When a drone is actually working in the air, you have your application talking to the device is connected to the controller sends the controls to the drone, and the drone replies with its video link back to the controller. And of course, most of the time, it's also hearing information from GPS. Now, what ends up happening with the majority of drones on the market today is that they're connected by the internet and they're constantly sending all this information back to the vendor servers, such as the location of the operator, the location of the drone, if they're allowed to be in the area or not, information such as the user. So there's a lot of data that is surrounding drones at this point in time. Now, back when Wi-Fi drones were a thing, still there's Wi-Fi protocols, not so much in terms of the weak and vulnerable side. But I just want to give you an idea of how easy it was to breach a drone back in the day. So often, just like a monitoring device, you would scan the air for MAC addresses. You'd be able to find a MAC address that matches a drone manufacturer. You could connect to that wireless network, either it was hidden or public. And again, using existing vulnerabilities or brute forcing methods, you could just drop into one of those ports, whether it's Telnet or SSH. You hop into the operating system, you identify your own IP address, you identify the operator's IP address. And once you can see theirs, you're able to use things like IP tables, because again, it was a generic Linux box, to be able to block out that operator, port the video stream to your device using various stream methods, and again, port the controls as well, and then fly that drone away. Now, that was quite a golden era of drones with inherent weaknesses. Drones have changed since then. They've got various protocols and I guess technologies that are part of all their stacks. We have the Parrot drones, for example. Some of them are connected via 4G, and they use LTE and GSM. We have other drones that are still connected via Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and operate on some of those standards that we know and love. And then we also have a range of drones that operate via RF. So your software-defined radio principles, you've got OSINT, you've got Lightbridge, you've got other kind of manufacturer proprietary systems. And when you look at all of these, they all have their own separate classes of vulnerabilities or exploits, different types of attacks that apply to them. And so when you're looking at a specific drone, if you're testing that drone, you need to apply the same kind of standards that you would to that protocol or communication stack as well. And if you're in the field and you're intercepting a drone as well, you would need to know that to be able to counter that. And so today, a large amount of the countermeasures will either be vanilla GPS jamming, or it will be based on some of those protocols we already know about. Now, many of you know about drone light shows, and of course they were at the Olympics. They love them because they are less pollution. It reduces the chance of bushfires, especially here in Australia. And you've got 300 to 500 drones, sometimes more, making beautiful pictures in the sky. Of course, we all thought this innovation was great until we realized, these drone light shows are connected to a central node, and often these can be exploited, and they have been in an upwards trend. So over the course of 2020 and 2021, and then recently in 2022 as well, we've seen drone light shows affected by people trying to hack into them or breach them. So they'll often have a lack of wireless security. You can do a denial of service to their ground control stations or the drones themselves and try to manipulate that ground control station. And so this is something where, if this occurs, the drones will do one of two things. They'll either drop out of the sky or they'll do their return to home mechanism. Here you can see them hitting cars, bikes, falling on people. In this instance, it was allegedly another vendor who lost the contract to fly the drone show. And so they knew how it worked. And so they went and jammed their competitor's drone show, causing a bit of mass hysteria there. And I just wanted to think about, we are getting quite lax with the fact that we can have these hundreds of drones in the sky above people. If you think about manipulating that control or potentially sending them in another direction or a flight path, it starts to get quite dangerous. And so this is something where I know personally security firms have offered their services to drone light show vendors. And because it's all about the innovation right now, they're going without testing or security. So it's incredibly important. And if you are a pen testing firm, I highly recommend you either try to get some of these drones to do tests on them, or go to that vendor and ask to do even a type of test to identify the risks, because them showing safety and security built with that in mind when they go to the council or they go to an organization to do this just makes it a safer place for everyone. And so this occurred in Australia. We didn't see it happening in Western nations as much, but in Australia, we had a drone light show happening in Melbourne at a Docklands area. And an actor, allegedly with only a $350 piece of equipment, I'll let your minds wander to anything from HackerF to a Yagi setup, interfered with that entire show. And so they couldn't take off, they couldn't operate. And so we had various law enforcement agencies over here trying to track down the source of those attacks, which of course you'd be looking for that power output, you'd be looking for the various technology trying to do that. In this case, he was found and arrested. And by the way, just a comment for the Twitch chat, if you've got any questions, do put them in. I'll get to it afterwards if we have time. And so it's not just about the drones. And of course, I want to give you an overview of everything within the cybersecurity here. And if you have further questions or queries, please come talk to me. And I've got many other presentations like this. But what we're seeing is physical outcomes as a result of digital leaks relating to drones, right? If you look at DJI, they have a public bug bounty program, as do Parrot. If you look at the number of subdomains they have an incredible attack surface. This was some of our own research a little while ago, where we're just seeing an incredible amount of, fleet servers. You could find counter-UAS or AeroScope servers. You could find UTM and places where they were storing this information. There's a huge attack surface to run all these systems, and yet there's still a lack of focused security on it. And so I'm going to take you through one or two huge vulnerabilities which occurred, which did not end up making the news because it was responsible disclosure. But I want to give you an idea of the impact there. Simple Google Docs to search a company that has a drone program. They often end up having manuals that they give to their suppliers or their contractors or people who run their drones. Sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's external. And so finding these documents means that sometimes you see where these technologies, the platforms store information. In this case, we found a critical infrastructure firm had hired a company to do the analysis. And this firm would never let a USB go in or out of their facility. They would never allow you to take photographs or take in mobile phones, yet they allowed a company to come with drones and do 3D modeling of their entire infrastructure down to the centimeter, extremely close-up visuals, information. And again, when a drone is flying in an area, it can sometimes pick up things like the nearby Wi-Fi networks, the Wi-Fi networks it's connected to, its GPS locations, all those kind of juicy things which should not be on a vulnerable S3 bucket. So we've seen everything from Azure storage blobs to S3 buckets containing this information, and still today, utilizing something like Grey Hat Warfare. If you do have a drone program, go and look for your own company or any data that may relate to it. And there's an extensive amount on there, far too much to be able to responsibly disclose. A similar kind of thing with these drone fleet dashboards. A lot of these dashboards allow you to launch, land drones, set waypoints. And a lot of these companies will have their front page, that they've got a drone program, or they advertise that they've got a brand new drone surveillance program. And that company is affected by breached credentials. And the problem is a lot of these users will, of course, use those same credentials to log into their normal systems as they do into their Fleet Hub servers or their different control nodes. And so we have been able to log into, and again, responsibly disclose and report to various customers that their same breach credentials, even though they may have changed it internally for their domain, works to log into their drone fleet and be able to control those drones or disable them, which is the first thing an adversary would do if they were trying to compromise a physical location, is try to disable the security or the surveillance systems as well. A similar type of thing with law enforcement utilizing drones. So there is one law enforcement department, Chula Vista, in the US, that publicly and transparently puts all their flights online. And they do that for reasons so that there's trust and transparency in the public. But for some of those that do not realize that these are public, they're uploading all their flight data to places where they can analyze where they went, what their batteries were like, what occurred, and so forth. The issue is a huge amount of these, not just this platform, but a huge amount of these platforms are not private by default. They haven't got security built in mind. And so you can use simple Google Docs to search for it, or you could use brute force in terms of IDORs or whatnot with Burp Intruder to go through and find all these different flights. And if you start using a few docs based on the name, the date, or the location, or the type of drone, you can really refine who you're looking for. The problem with this is some of these systems allow you to view the flight, but they allow you to view the entire flight log and the drone's log files. And downloading a log file, as you know, there's a lot of software out there you can do this with, whether it's Flight Reader or some of the others. CSV view and so forth, you can assess the drone serial numbers, both for the batteries, the control of the drone itself. You can assess who the pilot was, the GPS locations, if they've taken it home and flown it, if they've flown it from sensitive locations. There's a huge amount of juicy data in there to be able to look at and do forensics on, and sometimes includes photograph thumbnails, even when they weren't meant to publish that. So again, a lot of these occur because there is a hobbyist employee. They bring a drone in, they demonstrate value, and then, of course, the company doesn't procure it in the same way as everything else that they usually do. And so I kind of want to get to the culmination of this, which is, and I don't think this is a quote, but it sounded like a quote when I wrote it. It was, where there is sec, there is anti-sec. And just to keep in mind, the public is becoming more and more aware of counter-drone systems, right? Which are the systems that bring drones down. And there's various methods. You've got kinetic methods, such as shooting it down with a shotgun, again, losing all of that forensic juicy goodness. You can take a drone down with a net, but there's also, protection measures installed on the drone itself, like no-fly zones. And no-fly zones are a bunch of coordinates sitting on the drone. They can be removed by the modder or the owner of the drone. And then you have electronic countermeasures. So you've got GPS jamming or RF jamming, which jams the connection between the controller and the drone, makes it return to home or land on spot. Or you have protocol manipulation, which is the nicer way of saying we've reverse engineered the protocol and we can spoof those commands back to it and tell it to actually do something. So instead of just jamming the drone, you're hijacking it, you're telling it to land in a certain position, right? We don't really do the Eagles anymore. That was a thing of the Netherlands police who attempted it. Number one, the talons of the Eagle were quite strong at the time, and so it could take down a single drone. But very quickly, they realized it wouldn't work with an entire swarm or fleet of drones. Certain hacking groups have started purchasing these drone guns, as I was mentioning before, that have some of these jamming mechanisms, and they're trying to create software bypasses to try and bypass the energy or the power or the jamming enacted by these systems. And so, for example, NeoBooster allegedly now protects against some of these handheld jammers. So adversaries are actively looking to create TDPs and technology against counter-UAS so that they can fly in zones that they're not meant to be, no-fly zones, or military zones and so forth. So number one, we need to be aware that this type of thing is enacting. The second thing is the AeroScope. It's been in the news a lot recently for a breach that apparently affected about 80 million drone IDs, which means that system has sat there and detected a bunch of drones in the air, and then that information has been stored somewhere and now been leaked. A couple of years ago, Kevin Finisterre, DJI Reverse Engineering Group, were able to put out a spoofing script for the AeroScope mobile. This basically meant that it showed thousands of drone swarms in the area with random information and made it seem like it was overloaded and they couldn't find out what was actually signal or noise. Pairing this with the ability to remove your drone ID or remove that identification means that you could fly silently in one of those areas if this was disrupted. So there's active scripting and operations to create things that will bypass some of these countermeasure systems. And, a few years ago, we started this research question, and it was a little bit bold, but we said, how many drones are actually available and accessible via the internet? Even if they're accessible, maybe we'll simply get the information from them, not the control. But we weren't expecting to be able to find more than a drone. In fact, we logged into a system which had elements of drone around it. We contacted the vendor first and we said, we've located this. We want to analyze it in a bit more detail. And what we saw was a control panel, which basically gave us these options. And when choosing option 2, we realized that we could completely deactivate a counter-drone system. And so thanks to Shodan, we extended that search result to a whole bunch more and found hundreds of counter-drone systems accessible and manipulatable online. This wasn't just systems that had API calls that you could interact with and find the information that they were viewing. It included the entire dashboard to launch drones, take drones down, stop the system from working. And a lot of these were, actually protecting live assets in the field. And it's incredible because a lot of these are cloud-based now, right? So customers want it to be remotely accessible via their SOC, or they want to be able to remotely log into all these various sites around the country. And the problem is counter drones are also under a lot of pressure to raise startup funds and to innovate very, very quickly and get into their customers' hands. And so security isn't necessarily the highest priority. And so your adversary who is looking to fly a drone in a certain area, the first thing they're going to do is try to look up the IPs or the IP blocks belonging to that company and be able to find these countermeasure systems online. What we ended up finding was everything from our major airports leaking data of even sensitive drones flying in that area to finding their GPS locations and then being able to log in. And one of the key things about finding even just the GPS location of a drone detection system online, whether it's via Shodan or whether it's via even Google Cache, is that you can find the physical location and conduct physical operations against it. And so within Ukraine, as many of you may have seen, a number of their detection systems went down over a period of days. And some of them went down just a few days before an attack occurred where drones were involved in doing intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance. Now, there was a lot of questions over whether it's a coincidence, whether it was a coordinated attack, trying to view the log files and find out what happened. But if you are able to see this online, and the pictures of those dashboards were shared online in various Telegram chat groups, once you see that GPS location, you could do a targeted artillery strike. You could have a human in a non-conflict zone go and physically disable it, pull out the power, disrupt it. Protecting the location of your counter-drone systems is incredibly important. It's like leaving the IP address and the dashboard open to your EDR or to your antivirus system open to the world, right? It's a little bit useless. And so this type of thing meant that an attack could take place. They could use drones in the area, they wouldn't be detected, and they'd fly under the radar. And so I want to kind of leave you with one last thing before I come up with a conclusion. And I know we've covered quite a few things today. It's been a little bit all over the place, but that is the scope of drones and counter drones when it comes to the digital security space, right? You also almost have to know about the counter drone arena before you start looking at drone security, because inherently they are the same thing. And some of the most popular counter-drone systems on the market today are a bunch of hackers working on reverse engineering the systems and the protocols and using SDR exploits or on attacks against these types of drones. And so I just want to leave you with anti-forensics. Now, when a raid occurs, often police will try to seize removable media or hard drives or things like that. And in a rush, when a raid occurs, usually there's not enough time, but if someone gets a heads up, what they usually try to do is throw their hard drives or removable media into a microwave or bang it with a hammer. Something that's been floating around in various groups on a technique to use when you are being raided came from Russia. So there was a Kremlin raid on a Putin opponent. One of these was a journalist, and he had a bunch of hard drives. He was a little bit scared about putting these hard drives online or putting the data from the hard drives online because some of that was tracked and assessed. And so he set up this drone path so that when he got raided and he heard them coming to the door, he immediately launched the drone carrying those hard drives. It flew to a friend in a neighboring tower and was able to deliver those hard drives in a way that it saved the hard drive material. There was no destruction. There was no evidence of destruction. He simply didn't have anything to investigate. We've now seen this popping up where certain adversaries will say, hey, here is a drone data exfiltration methodology if you're doing something naughty. Of course, we all know that police would now arrive with a counter-drone system, right? So I've got a few closing remarks here, and I think we're just good for time, which is good. But drones and counter-drone systems, they are cyber-physical, right? We're starting to move into that arena where the physical systems we used to think were hackable are not quite the same. They fly, they can carry payloads, they can have devastating impacts on and effects on people. And they're a great extension to hacking and red team operations as well, right? Today, and we see this all the time, there are major vulnerabilities and data sovereignty issues affecting a lot of UAS. The fleets, the counter-drone systems, there are great efforts with the Blue SUS program. I know there's great companies as well, like Dark Wolf Solutions in North America as well. And they're able to do drone pen testing and things like that. There are just so many systems out there that haven't been scrutinized through this information. And so what we need is actually more people on the drones arena. As I said, the scale is increasing so rapidly that we're looking at millions and millions of commercial and hobbyist drones. And the commercial space is growing quicker than the hobbyists right now. And so we're getting to the point where many organizations can't operate anymore without drones to do those kind of dirty and dangerous jobs. So we need people with an open source intelligence. We need people within RF and SDR skills. We need pen testers to kind of join this arena. And if you're looking for maybe a field change or a career change to focus on drones, there are a lot of jobs out there. There's some large companies who are working on drones who need that support, and they are hiring. And it's a new space where you do get to make your mark and find new things and be able to publish that to be able to make an impact. And then lastly, if you are doing analysis in the space, and if your company offers drone pen testing or red team operations, you need to understand what the threat actors are using today and how they're using that so you can replicate some of their TDPs in your red team operations. It even gets to the point where you're going to have counter drone systems asking for a test and evaluation. Can you breach their system via a drone, or can you also breach it via the internet and then fly your drone? So there's a lot that cybersecurity can do in this space because they're inherently computers. We're just not seeing enough of that yet. So that ends my presentation. I hope it was a little bit of an insight into delving into drones and so forth. You know, there's a great article as well called DroSINT, which is drones and OSINT. If you're looking at using OSINT within drones, that's by Intel Inquirer. You can also just Google DroSINT, drones and OSINT. We do have a Slack group, dronesec.slack.com. If you join that, we'll be able to discuss various aspects about drones, vulnerabilities, hacking, and so forth. And we do also have a drone security training course. And I'm not here to pitch that. It's just, it goes into a lot more detail, many more hours of this that we can't fit into a single talk. It's the reason why we made it. And we're happy to offer 20% off to participants here if it's what you're looking for. So to the organizers, thank you for having me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. Really enjoyed giving the talk. Appreciate everyone for giving your time. And I'm happy to answer some questions if the organizers tell me that's okay to do. I do see one or two questions. So I see, are there more secure drone vendors than others? Hopefully I can answer these. I'll wait for the admins to tell me if I can answer or not. Okay, so there's one or two questions. I'll just cover those. Are there more secure drone vendors than others? So the first thing here is that Blue C-UAS program. They've gone through a number of phases, but it basically means that they are certifying which vendors create secure products, right? It doesn't necessarily mean the vendor itself is more secure, but they've created a product which meets the standards, the security guidelines and frameworks of, as I said, hijacking, denial of service, data exfiltration, and so forth. So there's a number of drones on there. You can go and look up that list, just Google Blue C-UAS, and it will tell you which vendors are more secure than others. I will caveat that because it needs to be said by the fact that if you go more secure, it's going to be more expensive. And so you need to be aware that if you suddenly want to buy an entire fleet, which is secure, suddenly you're going to have to put up a little bit more money. But some of those vendors are putting in the effort, and you can find that. Let's see if there was any others here. No, I don't see any others yet. So that might end me for the day. I really appreciate the time, and thanks for having me, everyone.